Hello everyone, and welcome to another weird Dell thing that never really quite took off. This is the Dell Studio Hybrid 140G, supposed to be the start of a whole new line of computers focused on taking the PC experience and making it a lot more environmentally friendly. And sure enough, this does accomplish that. It consumes less wattage than your typical PC while retaining pretty much the same performance, and it's made from mostly recycled materials, and, well, it has a tiny footprint. Just for comparison, here is an HP external CD writer. All this is an IDE drive in a box, and, well, the Dell is actually significantly smaller. It's a little bit wider, but in terms of length, well, the Dell's just tiny. It may just look like a simple, boring box, but this actually holds a lot of surprises that I certainly was interested in, and I hope you will be too. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this system. But first, its history. So this came out around 2006, 2007, when netboxes were starting to become a big thing. Now, a netbox, similar to a netbook, was a very small, very weak computer intended mainly for running web applications. So basically, these were the thin clients of the mid-2000s, and we've looked at some thin clients in the past, and well, this Dell Studio isn't much bigger. But the main difference between a netbox and this is that netboxes typically had very low-end soldered laptop Celerons or Atoms, maybe one RAM slot with 1 GB of RAM. They were really low-end, as were netbooks. But the Dell Studio is a lot more fully featured with a lot more upgradability than your typical netbox. We'll get into that in a little bit. This, of course, was an addition to the Dell Studio line. Studio was cut around the late 2000s, early 2010s, I believe, but that was Dell's name for their higher-ish end consumer-grade systems. So it was below their XPS gaming systems, but it was above the Inspiron mom's living room PCs. So it was kind of in the middle. They had typically pretty nice Core 2 Quad processors, maybe a little NVIDIA graphics card for HDMI output. So they were pretty decent little computers. So it makes sense that this would fit into the Studio line. Before we get into too much detail, let's just look at the exterior. So on the front, we have headphone, 2 USB 2, USB 2 SD card reader, and, well, that's it, isn't it? No. Here's the computer's first big surprise. This little slot here is actually an optical drive. Now, I would demonstrate how a disk fits in if there wasn't one stuck in there, because it actually ate my Windows 7 install disk, and it's just in there forever now. So that's fun. It turns out the touch-controlled eject button doesn't quite work very well, but that'll be another thing you see later. On the back, you have the system's one cooling fan, which is quite quiet, a power jack for the 65-watt laptop charger, gigabit Ethernet, which is nice, and a couple audio outputs. So line in, line out, SPDIF, so optical, 1394, so FireWire 400, and 3 USB 2 ports. Now here you have 2, or so it seems, display outputs, DVI and HDMI. Unfortunately, they can't be used simultaneously, and that is a big downside to this system, in my opinion. All the HDMI port is on the inside is essentially a DVI to HDMI adapter, so it actually doesn't work if the DVI cable is plugged in, because DVI has priority. So if you plug both in, only the DVI gives output, If you plug only the HDMI in, the HDMI works, and of course if you plug only the DVI in, the DVI works. But it's a little unfortunate that you can't use them together, and I don't get why that limitation exists, because the Intel onboard graphics in here are damn well capable of driving multiple displays. After all, this is laptop hardware in here, and I've seen a good amount of laptops with this chip, and they all can drive the internal display plus a VGA or DVI or HDMI or whatever port. So it's a completely arbitrary limitation that this can't drive two displays. It's more than capable of doing so. It's time to start opening it up now. Now, unfortunately, as I keep demonstrating, this is my huge complaint with this machine. It's round. Why did they make it round? So that they could charge you about $15 for the stand accessory. It has an optional stand so that you can put your computer like this. But, as you'll see on the inside, all of the hardware fits into a square footprint. So this whole circle thing just only makes it bigger and less convenient. However, it does look pretty nice. I will admit that. It's a nice, sleek look that is complemented by the lights when you turn it on, as you'll see shortly. It's enclosed in this sleeve. Why? To look good. This is purely for fashion. They did some very Apple iMac-esque marketing with this as well. So you could get multiple different resin colors, and this is just the gray one, so the blandest one, which kind of fits me well. They also offered actual bamboo. Like, it wasn't like a texture, like a skin. It was actually made out of bamboo, and I would have loved to obtain that one, but unfortunately I couldn't find any for sale. But on the inside, you just get a little computer here. Now this isn't metal. It kind of looks like metal, but that is just plastic. And it's the same plastic used on a lot of their studio laptops, actually. We'll go ahead and get this off, and then I'll show you how I found out about the optical drive. So it's just one screw that comes out, and then this just nicely slides off. Now, you might be able to see, actually I don't think you can see, you kind of can, that Dell logo is transparent. And that is because, or rather translucent, because there's lighting on the inside for it, and it nicely, kind of softly glows white when the machine is powered on. So that is very aesthetically pleasing. But here's how I found out it had an optical drive. Before you can get to the motherboard, you have to take this out, and it's a cute little bundle of drive containing the optical drive, and you can kind of see the disk stuck in there, and the hard drive. Now this is a DVD rewriter from Toshiba Samsung storage technology, pretty solid drive, and the hard drive originally in here was a 250 gigabyte Scorpio Blue that was very dead. It kept crashing when I tried to install an operating system on it, so very corrupted drive. I swapped it out for a 320 gigabyte Scorpio Black, so that's a fast 7200 RPM laptop drive. However, another nice surprise is that it can actually fit one of these. This is a 15mm, 10,000 RPM drive. A WD Velociraptor is the name, and those will actually fit in this system, which is a wonderful touch. You do kind of have to stuff it in there, but they do fit. Obviously, there are no cables here, and that's a very nice touch, because all of the SATA drives plug into this backplane that then connects to the motherboard through this slot, and it's wonderful. You don't have to worry about, hooking up cables to drives in the tight space and then pinching them when you put the lid on. It is so convenient to have a discrete backplane that just does all of it. It makes putting it back together easier, it makes taking it apart easier, so I really commend Dell for doing this. But then, Here's the motherboard, and yeah, it's in a square box, as you can tell here. This shielding fits all in a square footprint. So they could have just put this in a square case, pretty similar in size to the Dell Thin Client I showed earlier, and that would have saved a lot of space, and, you know, could have stood up. But the actual motherboard design completely surpassed my expectations. As you can see, you've got a pretty decently sized heatsink, 2 RAM slots, and 2 full height mini PCIe expansion slots. One is marked as wireless LAN for internal Wi-Fi, and it has somewhere, yes, they're down here, it has 2 antennas that go, well, to the case. And it also has Bluetooth, back when that was a separate feature from wireless cards, and it was like an optional card that size. But you can stick almost anything in there except for an mSATA SSD. It's not wired for SATA, I did test that, but any mini PCIe card will work in these slots. And the CPU socket here is socket P, and it uses a pretty early Core 2 Duo chipset, since after all, this is like 2007-ish, so kind of at the beginning of laptop Core 2 Duos. That means it'll take some of the up to like medium clock T-series 800 MHz FSB Core 2 Duos. This came with a Pentium T3200, which is just a 2 GHz Core 2 Duo, but with less cache. I've tried this with a variety of chips, from the 667 to 800 MHz FSB era, and all of them have worked. Currently, I have a T7250 in here, so that's a 2 GHz, 800 MHz, I believe, frontside bus chip, and it's performing quite well. Another limitation of the chipset is RAM. Now, it'll only run at 667 MHz because of the chipset's limitations, and unfortunately, it's a 32-bit system. You can install a 64-bit OS onto it because it's capable of having a 64-bit CPU in here, but the chipset can only address a 32-bit amount of RAM. So that means you're limited to about 3.5 gigabytes in practice, which is not the worst I've seen. I've seen 32-bit systems that barely take over 3 gigabytes. So you can put 4 gigs in here, but it might only show up as like 3.5. So, oops. So just be aware of that. That's about all I have to show for the nice little inside. I feel like now we should get it put back together and plugged in. There we go. So it looks very nice once plugged in with this backlit hybrid logo, and the eject button that doesn't quite work, and the power button, which it's currently glowing amber because the CMOS battery is dead, and I'm going to unplug it in a minute because it will start beeping incessantly, which is really unfortunate. I've never had any other computer that does this, but basically, if the CMOS battery is dead, instead of just warning you, the first time you plug it in, if the CMOS battery is dead, it'll just beep, and it'll keep beeping, and it will never stop beeping until you can't unplug it again. You have to press the power button, wait a few seconds, and then turn it back on, and it'll work fine. I've never had, again, any other computer that does that, but it's definitely just a bit of an oddity of this, well, little oddity of a system. Unfortunately, you can't really see this light unless it's in a completely dark room, but I feel like that's enough of the outside, so let's go and plug it in and do a little bit of testing with this. Hook it up to DVI, not HDMI, and see what it's capable of, see what Hardware Info thinks of it. So yeah, let's go check it out. Well, here we are on the desktop running Windows 7, clearly on the little Dell Studio Hybrid. I'll get Hardware Info back up so I can talk a little bit more about the hardware. So here's the motherboard. It doesn't have the most attractive name. uses the GM965 chipset, which is, of course, a laptop chipset. This is the BIOS it shipped with, I assume, from 2008. I haven't updated it, although I plan to. Of course, it uses socket 478 as discussed, and I actually put the Pentium it shipped with back in because for some reason it wasn't getting past the post screen with the Core 2 Duo that I put in there. I only tested if it posted, not if it passed post. So I found out the hard way that evidently the T7250 doesn't work. You'll have to go with a T7200, I think. But yeah, here's our little system. The graphics are not very strong, even for a Intel GMA integrated chipset. It uses the GM965 as is standard, but instead of like an X4500, like you might see on even a later lower-end Core 2 Duo, it's just an X1300. So that is not a particularly fast piece of hardware. And for some reason it lists 2 here, which is a little funny. But actually, I might as well pull up GPU-Z just to give you another idea of what the video card is like. Now, this feels a good deal more sluggish than a full-size desktop you could get for the price because of its 2.5-inch hard drive, even though it is a 7200 RPM drive, this WD3200BEKT. So even though it's a 7200 RPM drive, it doesn't feel as responsive as you'd get out of a full-size desktop drive, which makes sense. That was probably a pretty huge drawback of this system. But another one is, of course, the GPU, which only has 8 ROPs and TMUs and 8 unified shaders. So, unfortunately, you're not going to get too much out of this card, but we will test it a little bit later. There's our CPU, as aforementioned, and our little Studio Hybrid motherboard. Now, funny enough, this chipset actually supports an AGP slot, and I would love to see an AGP slot in this system. But I believe that the PCI slot is being used to connect to the GPU, well, internally. It's an internal PCI link. The PCI Express by 1, 2 of those are used for the expansion slots. So that's pretty nice. And you are limited to DDR2 667 or 666 megahertz, even though you can put an 800 megahertz front side bus in here. So that is a thing to be aware of. But again, you're not buying this for the speed. You're buying it because it's a weird little guy and it's funny. Let's see, yeah, I think we can confirm that. Yep, the integrated graphics are indeed on the PCI bus. And it comes with the standard Intel or Realtek high-definition audio, so there's nothing special about... Wow, a driver from 2019. But anyway, let's go ahead and do an Unreal Tournament performance test, because, well, I mean, it's Unreal Tournament. There's no way it couldn't run well. And then I might go ahead and step it up a little higher for the graphics. I've tested Intel GMA integrated graphics in the past on both laptops and desktops, so I won't be doing a test that is too in-depth today, but these are the settings I'm using. So far it's running pretty well, but I'm testing this at full 1920 by 1080, and it's really kind of weird to be using laptop hardware like... Nice. You good there? It froze. Well, as I was saying before I was interrupted, it's pretty weird to be using laptop hardware in this form factor. It's weird to be using a keyboard and a mouse plugged into something sitting next to my desk, and then having to remember that it's a laptop in a box and not actual desktop hardware. Now, I don't want to claim that I'm a computer expert, but I think that means there's something wrong. Also, something else I should mention, this doesn't feature the standard Dell graphical BIOS, not even the blue and green one that they used in the early 2000s. This is just your regular, boring American Megatrends BIOS. And my USB inputs are repeating. I'm not touching the keyboard right now. And it's beeping and it's screaming at me. Ah, that's probably the issue. That is a 65 watt adapter. The adapter I plugged in literally says 65 watts. Okay, well, here's a different adapter. This is a 135 watt this time. I'm hoping it'll be happier with the 135 than it was with the 65. And as I mentioned, to keep it from just beeping constantly when you first plug it in, if the CMOS is dead, you have to shut it off and then turn it back on, and then you can use the little guy. Okay, here we go. So it didn't like the adapter that I was using. And this is a bit of a newer one, I believe. But with that out of the way, let's just get back to the Unreal Tournament. Now, as I was saying earlier, this is pretty much a fresh Windows install. All I have on here is Unreal Tournament 99 and 2004 and hardware info. That's literally it. Haven't installed any Windows updates. Only things I've installed are those programs and the drivers. And it is not a fast system because of that laptop hard drive. And yes, you could speed it up nowadays with an SSD, but I'm trying to showcase what it would have been like at the time, and did it do the thing again? Okay, so it's not wanting to boot back into Windows. It's not broken, per se. I mean, the system still works. I just have a feeling that something has gone slightly awry on the inside, and what you're looking at right now is the same video output that I am getting from the system. So, unfortunately, I was hoping to showcase some more of its capabilities, but it looks like that won't happen today. So, thank you everyone for watching. I'll try to get this little guy fixed, and if you are interested in seeing the performance of Intel GMA laptop and desktop chips, I've tested them a little bit in the past in some of my laptop videos and in some standalone videos. But that's it for today, so thank you everyone so much for watching. I'm glad to add another funny little thing to the collection. It's definitely a fun thing to have. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time.